Let's get it. The committee will come to order.
Is Mr. Kilby here? Is Kilby here yet? Is Kilby here yet? You know he's on
He was on the floor last night.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Werfel, thank you for being here today. I first want to address an issue that has been widely reported last week. A whistleblower came forward with troubling claims about abuses of power. And we are conducting a review of this matter and will go wherever the facts lead us. And I expect full cooperation from the IRS, particularly with regard to ensuring this whistleblower is protected from any retaliation. We value the importance and the role of whistleblowers in ensuring the integrity of our governing institutions, which is why we established an online portal providing IRS employees a direct avenue to provide information regarding any wrongdoing that they may witness or believe to be occurring. Commissioner, while I know you are fairly new on the job, it would be irresponsible not to put you on notice about the various concerns the American people have about your agency. Over the past 2 years, the IRS has leaked private tax information of Americans at the same time the Biden administration was pushing tax increases on those very individuals. Accidentally posted online the private taxpayer information of thousands of retirees. They apologized, they took it down, said it wouldn't happen again, and did the very same thing 4 months later. They destroyed over 30 million tax returns due to the backlog. They tried and then delayed for a year a new paperwork nightmare of gig economy workers under the new 1099K reporting requirements, and promised to release a spin plan for the $80 billion pay raise Democrats gave the agency, only to fail to explain whether low-income taxpayers will be protected from increased audits, and failed to show exactly how many bureaucrats in total you plan to put on the payroll. Repurpose $3.9 billion of the $80 billion to support costly green corporate handouts, and request an additional $43 billion for your agency last month on top of the $80 billion it received last August. Concocted plans to become the tax preparer, the tax filer, and government auditor of the American people. I was surprised that after receiving the greatest windfall in agency history, the president's fiscal year 24 budget requested an additional $43 billion. That's 91% of which is targeted toward enforcement and operations, like further increasing audits on middle-class families. Meanwhile, the IRS cannot tell us in total, beyond the next 2 years, how many people it plans to hire with its new funding. Statements from you and Secretary Yellen make clear that audit rates will rise for Americans earning less than $400,000. The only question left is how fast those rates will rise. When I asked for a plan, I was not looking for assurances. I was looking for concrete proposals of how the Treasury Department and your agency will protect lower and middle income Americans. I look forward to you making good on your commitment from last week to follow up with far more detail about how your agency plans to spend these funds over the next 10 years. Democrats supercharged the IRS with the hopes of raising billions to pay for special interest tax breaks for the wealthy that are now projected to cost 3 times that amount. Now, the IRS is dedicating billions to support these green corporate handouts. And it's clear Democrats are all about subsidizing the low-emission lifestyles of the wealthy. It's not only new audits Americans have to worry about. The Inflation Reduction Act includes new reporting requirements for any Venmo or PayPal transaction over $600. Is it really a top priority for tax collectors to know whether someone is selling a used couch or unused concert tickets or paying for their neighbor's kid to mow the lawn? This gives your agency too much power and, in effect, creates a surveillance network that will invade Americans' privacy and squeeze them out of more of their hard-earned dollars. The IRS has a lot of work to do to repair the trust it has broken with the public over the last decade. I hope we can begin the conversation to do that in today's hearing. And I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Ranking Member Neal, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to welcome to the Committee on Ways and Means Commissioner Werfel. It certainly is an honor to have you here today, and we look forward to working with you as you start your time as the Commissioner. So let's start by saluting the dedicated workers of the Internal Revenue Service. It's their commitment to taxpayers that has allowed for the Inflation Reduction Act to make such quick headway. Many members on the other side of the aisle in their constituencies are already taking advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of investments as they relate to the tax credits. Your testimony this morning or this afternoon comes at an important time for the IRS. The Democratic multi-year investment in the Internal Revenue Service has already unlocked a new era of service for America's taxpayers. This filing season alone, Americans experienced a historic level of customer assistance and support. 2 million more calls were answered through live assistance. Wait times were drastically decreased. New digital tools were introduced, and in-person services at taxpayer assistance centers were expanded. Modernizing the IRS should have been a bipartisan undertaking. Its systems needed to be remodeled, and we are appreciative of the fact that it appears as though the much-needed headway is now underway. Updates to technology infrastructure will pay dividends for the American taxpayers for decades to come. It still is the old adage, people at the bottom shouldn't be paying for more than they ordinarily would because people at the top are able to escape their fair share. The Inflation Reduction Act also reverses decades of Republican targeted cuts to the IRS, taking action to close the tax gap and eliminate our two-tiered tax system. Far too long, the wealthy and the well-connected have been able to get away with not paying their share at the expense of everyday Americans. Interesting to note that the compliance rate for those who pay taxes through withholding is in the high 90 percentiles. The IRS recently released strategic operating plans. It's a strong blueprint for bringing our historic legislation to reality. Soon the IRS will be better equipped to ensure that top 1% of those who avoid the tax system will be held accountable. Once again, the contrast between our achievements and the extremism of the other side could not be more clear. We have pushed for decided action to regain taxpayers' trust and build a fairer tax code. And just yesterday, our colleagues on the other side doubled down on undoing this progress and thereby adding to the deficit. While we are looking out for workers and their families, they apparently were looking out for their own, costing taxpayers $100 billion. That is sadly not the limit of that extremism. They have advocated for legislation that would abolish the IRS in favor of a 30% national sales tax. I served on this committee when members on the other side did precisely that. Republicans would raise the cost of groceries, gas, medicine, child care, and just about all aspects of life for the middle class, while extending the unfunded tax cuts for the wealthy and well-connected. That would create more harm than good. So I look forward to working with you as we continue to implement the Inflation Reduction Act and deliver on our shared commitment to a tax system that works for all members of the American family. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Neal. Today's sole witness is the very new Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, Mr. Daniel Werfel. The committee has received your written statement, and it will be made part of the formal hearing record today. Commissioner Werfel, you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the filing season and the IRS budget. I'm pleased to report the IRS provided substantially better service to taxpayers during the 2023 filing season. We delivered a strong tax season for the nation, the best in several years. IRS employees were able to make substantial improvements this tax season because of funding Congress provided through the Inflation Reduction Act. This funding made a difference. It allowed us to hire more than 5,000 phone assisters, which led to a phone level of service averaging 85% during the filing season. The average wait time on the phone was 3 minutes. This is a major improvement from last year when service levels were under 16% and wait times averaged 28 minutes. Perhaps most telling was this. IRS employees answered 7 million calls to help taxpayers. That's 2.7 million more than last year. Improvements were seen in other areas. We increased face-to-face visits at our taxpayer assistance centers to 523,000, up about 30% from the year before. And we expanded digital scanning efforts to speed up the processing of paper returns. Providing a better filing season experience this year was an important step, but more work remains. The long-term funding gives us a unique opportunity to transform our agency over the next decade. Historically, the IRS received funding that allowed our staffing and operations to keep pace with the size of the U.S. population. In 2010, that changed. Cuts in annual funding caused IRS staffing levels to decline by nearly 17% to less than 80,000 full-time employees by 2022. While the IRS shrank, the U.S. population grew by more than 7%, reaching 334 million. These reductions caught up with us. You could see that in the poor taxpayer service levels in previous years, including last year. We were able to improve this filing season by shifting Inflation Reduction Act funds over to our day-to-day operations. If we continue using IRA funds this way, focused on short-term operations rather than long-term systemic improvements, we will not be able to transform the taxpayer experience, modernize outdated IRS technology, and deliver more effective enforcement of the tax laws as the IRA envisioned. The IRA funding was designed to restore IRS core operations and prepare the agency to serve the nation in its future. But that work is outside of our base funding levels. That level of funding, which is $12.3 billion for fiscal year 2023, has not materially increased since fiscal year 2010. In fact, in real terms, we are 33% below our funding level in FY 2010 if we had just received inflationary adjustments. It's not enough resources to fund a tax system in an economy that grows in size and complexity every year. So I ask for your help to build on the remarkable progress we saw this filing season by supporting the $1.8 billion in incremental discretionary funding requested for fiscal year 24. This funding will enable us to maintain our current performance in the next filing season while allowing us to use IRA resources as Congress intended to modernize our operations so we can sustain and improve our service to taxpayers into the future. Our strategic operating plan lays out in detail our path forward, describing how we will improve all aspects of our operations. The plan, which I call our public to-do list, lays out more than 200 projects for improvements for taxpayers, tax professionals, and IRS employees that will transform our work on the phones, in person, and online. IRA funding also gives us an important opportunity to improve enforcement efforts to promote fairness while respecting taxpayer rights. The agency will follow Secretary Yellen's directive not to raise audit rates above historic levels for small businesses and households making less than $400,000. I want to be crystal clear. We are not increasing audit rates for hardworking taxpayers making under $400,000. That is my pledge. There is no new surge of audits coming for workers, retirees, and others. We have plenty of other areas we need to focus on. I am optimistic we can build on the accomplishments of this filing season. The question is not whether the IRS can improve taxpayer services. This year we proved that dramatic improvement is possible. The question is whether we continue to improve. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and members of the committee, that concludes my statement. I would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now proceed to the question and answer session, and I will begin. Nearly 2 years since a massive leak of confidential taxpayer information was published by ProPublica. The American people are still without answers from the Biden administration on who is responsible and how this could have occurred. This leak happened at the same time the administration was pushing for higher taxes on the same taxpayers who had their information disclosed. Given this terrible breach of trust at the IRS, what has the agency done in the last 2 years to secure its systems to prevent something like this from happening again?
Mr. Chairman, data security is essential to everything we do. For the whole system to work, taxpayers have to have trust in our abilities here. And as I roll up my sleeves on the job, I'm taking numerous steps to assess our current capacities and our current gaps. And I have to tell you, there are areas that I have been impressed with. We successfully defend more than 1 billion cyber attacks a year. And I've looked into our employee training. It's very robust, including what are the consequences of failure to secure our data. But as you mentioned, there are areas we need to improve. And I would point to TIGTA and GAO have a series of recommendations for how to strengthen our overall data security process, in particular with respect to our IT. And underfunding is one major reason why we don't have the score, an A on that report card. But with funding under the IRA and with renewed purpose around data security and IT modernization, my objective is to get that A on the report card for those TIGTA recommendations and those GAO recommendations.
Let's get the A, Commissioner.
Absolutely.
As we discussed previously, we set up an online whistleblower portal for IRS personnel wishing to share information with the committee. I continue to urge you to let your employees know about the portal. I believe it will encourage agency personnel who witness wrongdoing to come forward. And just this last week, we received outreach from an IRS whistleblower requesting the committee look into concerns the individual has about allegations of misconduct. So can you commit that there will be no retaliation against that whistleblower?
Mr. Chairman, while I can't comment on a specific case, I can say without any hesitation, there will be no retaliation for anyone making an allegation or a call to a whistleblower hotline.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Biden administration first asked for $80 billion to hire 87,000 new employees. The administration later claimed it would be hiring to replace retirements, and it would not be adding 87,000 additional employees. However, the information you released related to how the agency will spend the funding shows 30,000 new employees in just the next 2 years. At that rate, you will surpass 87,000 over 10 years. Can you clear up the discrepancies here? And right now, you have 85,000 employees at the IRS. How many total employees do you intend to have working at the IRS in 10 years?
Mr. Chairman, as I told the Senate Finance Committee last week, we are working on a final set of estimates for that, and I'll have that information, the full 10-year view of the hiring plan within the next few weeks. I can clarify a couple of things, though, about your question, which is one important point is also to recognize the attrition that we have. Through 2024, 16,000 IRS employees are expected to retire. So this is not all about plussing up IRS staff. We are also making up for the staff that we're losing to retirements and other attrition. The other point I want to make about staffing increases is that staffing increases are necessary to keep pace with the tax system that we have today. You know, in my opening statement, I talked about the rise in the population, the rise in the number of filers, the rise in the complexity of the tax law. That means we get more phone calls to our call center. That means we get more people walking into our walk-in centers. And if we don't have the staff to meet them, answer their questions, then we're failing the American people and doing our job to serve them. And on the enforcement side, just one more point. Today, we have 2,600 IRS employees that are responsible for assessing the most wealthy taxpayers, the most wealthy filers. That's individuals, large corporations, and complex partnerships. There are roughly 390,000 of these wealthy taxpayers. I'm not talking about $400,000 a year. I'm talking about $10 million a year. I'm talking about $10 million in assets. I'm talking about, for these large corporations, $250 million in assets. For the very top of our income strata, 390,000 filers, 2,600 staff. And as a result, we've seen a dramatic decline in the audit coverage of our wealthiest filers. And when you see our staffing numbers over the next 10 years and you have them through the 3-year window, I ask you to think about what we're doing is closing the gap when we talk about enforcement between those 2,600 employees and the 390,000 of our wealthiest filers in America.
In regards to your comments earlier about not increasing audit rates on people making less than $400,000 a year, there's been a lot of statements from Secretary Yellen that says that the audit rates will not be above that of the historical audit rates, which was 2010 was the peak. When you say that there's not going to be an increase in audit rates, are you referring to the audit rates last year or the historical, like what Secretary Yellen has said?
Let me provide some clarity on that, Mr. Chairman. Here's where I'm at on this in consulting with Secretary Yellen and her team. We have a lot of work to do over the next few years. We're going to be focused completely on doing what I said earlier, closing the gap between our staff and the enforcement we need to do with our wealthiest. What that means is the audit rate, the most recent audit rate we have, that's complete and final, is 2018. That is the rate that I want to share with the American people. The audit rate will not go above that rate for years to come. Because for the next several years at least, we're going to be focused on the work that we're doing with the highest income filers. Now, once we start and reconsider that, because the 2008 rate is so low, it's not anywhere near the historical rate. If you probably looked at the years and said, wow, the historical rate's a lot higher than the rate in the most recent years. So even if we did start increasing our audit footprint a few years from now, then you're still not going to get anywhere near the historical average for quite some time. So I think there can be assurances to the American people that if you earn under $400,000, there's no new wave of audits coming. The probability of you being audited before the Inflation Reduction Act and after the Inflation Reduction Act are not changed at all.
The Inflation Reduction Act spends $15 million to pay for a supposedly independent analysis about the feasibility of setting up an e-file system through the IRS, which would essentially make the agency the American people's tax filer, their tax collector, but also their auditor. Asking the IRS to do your taxes is like asking your kid to guard the cookie jar. The temptation to take more than their so-called fair share is too much. Nevertheless, you all choose to hire an organization, New America, and a tax attorney, both of which have stated their support for establishing such an e-file system. How are we to expect this will be an impartial review if those in charge of it are already committed to seeing it happen?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. When I arrived at the IRS, I learned that we have this study that's mandated under the Inflation Reduction Act to study a direct file option. I want to stress the word option there because I think the important thing is whether we go forward with a direct file solution or not, and if we were to, it is an option for taxpayers. If they feel concerned about engaging with the IRS in a direct file solution, they don't have to do it. There are other ways to engage with the IRS. And that's, by the way, part of our hope and our vision that we will meet taxpayers where they are. If they want to file in paper, we're not thrilled with it, but we'll be ready for it. If they want a fully digital experience, if they want to work with a third-party servicer, we want to accommodate that. They currently don't have a direct file option, so my understanding from the Inflation Reduction Act is to study it and see if it's viable. The report's not done yet. It will be done by mid-May. And I understand, Mr. Chairman, that that you have a keen interest in seeing what this report says. I will make myself available once the report is out to answer any questions that you have. I'm happy to come back to this committee and testify on it. I just think it would be premature to get into the details of the study before it's finalized.
You know, our committee has learned that a different organization, MITRE, that occasionally does work for the IRS, conducted a study around taxpayer opinions about an IRS e-file system. Among their findings, most working class Americans who file simple tax returns do not want an IRS system. And the plan is only popular in cases where the IRS could pull off handling complex tax returns and providing state returns, basically adding a tax preparation software company inside the IRS. A lack of trust in government was one of the main reasons taxpayers would oppose an IRS system. And without objection, I'll be submitting the MITRE study for the record. So ordered. Commissioner Werfel, why wasn't the IRS transparent with the American people about this study?
Well, I want to make clear, Mr. Chairman, the IRS didn't ask for this study. We didn't commission the study. Often you have companies, nonprofits, academics on their own writing white papers, writing studies that the IRS didn't ask for. But if they send it to us, then we absolutely will look at it, in particular if it's credible, and MITRE is a very credible organization. And we have received the study from MITRE, and we were under the impression that it was going to be made public so that there wasn't a need to immediately report it out. But there was no intention of holding anything back here. People send us studies, we review them, and we will incorporate the findings from the MITRE study into our